Today's cardinal lesson is pretty simple. Do you have a will? Do you have a legal will that's in place, that's enforceable, that tells your heirs and it tells the state what to do with your stuff? And if you don't, I would say that that would be the next thing on your to-do list. I'd certainly suggest that. So I'm looking at a study from Gallup about this subject. Do you have a will? And they got all the age groups, and I just narrowed it down to the people that are listening to and watching my videos. And in the age group 50 to 64, which is a lot of you, 53% of the people have a will. And that means that 47% of the people don't. And that's a problem. And when we look at age 65 and over, 76% of the people have a will. And I think that it's just as people age, I mean, you go into that whole block, there's some point where people just take care of these matters because they can see it on the horizon or somebody kind of pushes them into doing it. But in any case, it's still 24% don't. And what I can tell you from practicing, because this is a standard thing we do in financial planning when we're bringing in clients, I mean, we want to see their will. And most people tell us, oh, yeah, I got a will, but it needs updating. I mean, we did that back when the kids were small, and we haven't. So within these numbers of the people that have a will, a large percentage of them have a will that is really out of date, and needs some. There could have been marriages since then, divorces since then, deaths, adoptions, a whole lot of things go on, life's changes, retirements. So now what we do in the estate planning business is I do a lot of reading, and I'm constantly reading about these estate plans of public people who died without a will, and watching like Aretha Franklin's is still going on. So is Prince's, where it's just, it's going to be, because to their benefit of their, like Prince and Aretha Franklin, their music is still making money. And so it's like, it's not over with when they're gone. It just keeps right on going. So there's more stuff to argue about. And the only people that end up with these large estates where there's no will are the lawyers, because these things are just argued forever and ever and ever and ever. And there's some heirs that are just going to be at odds with each other. I mean, there's marriages, divorces, children from different parents, and just all kinds of stuff, former business partners. But when we go to the list, the top of the list, Abe Lincoln died with no will. Now, Tom had something to say about that. We were getting ready for the show.
Yeah, so we were looking at the list here, and I said, I'm going to give Abe a little bit of a break here. I mean, he didn't get assassinated in a theater is not you don't see that coming. But he was a lawyer, so he should have still had a will. But
well, and he was president of the United States,
right?
But in any case, he had no will. Jimi Hendrix, I don't know if you can blame the drugs or whatever. Sonny Bono, he was a U.S. congressman. Skiing accident, but he was either in his 50s or 60s. I think it was his late 50s, with all the money and things that he had, and no will. Aretha Franklin, no will, and quite a bit of estate. They're still working on it. And Prince, no will, a lot of money there. And, this is just, your family is going to have a hard enough time after you pass that this is just not an extra thing that you don't have to leave them with, is being uncertain of your wishes and leaving them with the uncertainty from a legal standpoint or something that's enforceable. So we're going to take a look at a case study here today, and Tom's going to go through this with you, of the 68-year-old man who passed away without a will.
Yeah, so we're actually going to go through two case studies. This first one is going to be the one that's on the board. It's a 60-year-old guy who had no will. He was in a second marriage, and so this marriage had been, a lengthy marriage. It was about 40 years or so. So they got married a while ago, but it was a second marriage, and he had two children from the previous marriage. And so his current wife of 40 years had two stepchildren that were there. The unfortunate thing in the situation is the man was sick, so this could have been foreseen, but he ended up dying without a will. And so the wife is coming and trying to figure out what do we need to do, and has to go through the probate process in each state. And to make matters worse is he had real estate in two different states, and so you got property in two states without a will that you have to do probate in each state separately, because each state has their own laws around it. And so we have it listed up on the board intestate. That's when you die without a will. And so there's intestacy laws in each state that's specific to that state that say, okay, if you die without a will, what happens to all the property? And so in this particular state, what the rule said, what the law was in that state, was that the children, in this case her stepchildren, get 2/3 of the assets and she gets a third of the assets. Well, you could foresee an issue where that could really cause a problem for her. Now, fortunately for her, she had enough income, she had enough money where this isn't going to be an issue. But she really, I mean, if you had asked the husband before he died, the goal would have been to leave her the money and then the stepchildren the money after her. But how it works out, how it played out, is they get 2/3 of it now. She only gets a third of it. One of the things that made this a little bit better, not as bad, was he had an IRA, he had an annuity that had named her as a beneficiary. So anything with a named beneficiary is not subject to those rules. It passes by beneficiary. So she received that money, but he had a sizable portion of investments and then other assets that had no named beneficiary, had no transfer on death designation. And so it goes through the probate process. The courts look at everything. It's a lengthy process. You have to, you should, use a lawyer to help, account for everything, make sure it's distributed properly according to the laws. But at the end of the day, of the stuff that has to go through that probate process, she only gets a third of it, which was not the intention of the deceased husband. And so, it's one thing to, not want to think about dying, and we get that a lot, is it's hard to think about that, but it's really important to do so, because it leaves your family potentially in a really bad problem without having that will in place to really have your wishes be known after you're gone. Any comments on that case study, John, before Hans? Before
Well,
we go to
yeah,
the
I
next
mean,
one?
the property's held jointly, and a lot of the property was joint. Not all of it, but most of it. And when
And
it's
when you say
held
property, you're talking about the real estate, like
real estate.
physical,
Yeah.
property.
Yeah, I'm talking about real estate, and it had both their names on it. And so the kids are not going to get a third of that or 2/3 of that, because his name just comes off and hers, that doesn't even go through probate. Okay. The same thing with the IRA and the annuity they had. It just goes to the named beneficiaries, which fortunately on both of those, she was the primary. Those two kids were the contingent, which is a little insight of the way he was thinking, that he wanted things, is he wanted to leave everything to her. And then after she's gone, have it go to the kids. Wasn't necessarily a very good way to do it, but these two things provided she received a lot more than 1/3 of the estate. So I think, that just speaks a lot for making sure your real estate is properly titled joint tenants with rights of survivorship, and that your IRA and annuities and whatever else you have that has a beneficiary on it, that you not only have that completed, but you're directing it to the right people, because that doesn't have anything to do with a will. It passes straight there. And I really want you to talk about the second case study that really came up when we're talking about this one, where, I'll let you talk about it.
Yeah, so we have another second case study with some similarities in the situation, but it was a 78-year-old man had been previously married, had children, and the unfortunate part of this situation is he got married 4 months ago, so a very recent marriage, and then he dies suddenly, so unexpectedly he dies without a will. And it was the same rules in the state where 2/3 of the assets go to the children and 1/3 goes to the spouse. Well, what's different in this situation was 1/3 of the assets is going to this wife of 4 months. You can see how the children were not very happy with this because they said, you just joined our family. Why is it that you get 1/3 of it? But that's what the laws are in the state. The state has these intestacy laws, and that's just what it is. And he had a business that he was running. One of his sons was in the business, and now that business gets split that same way, 1/3, 2/3. There was a family house that has to get split this way. I mean, there's other assets, money in the bank, and things like that. So it is really caused a huge problem. And it's kind of the reverse of the first case study, where now we're in the first situation, the wife got 1/3 when really she should have been, ideally would have gotten all of the assets. Where in this second case study, the wife's getting 1/3 of the assets, which you could make the argument that she shouldn't get much of anything because she's so new to the family. But from the state standpoint, they don't care about any of that. They look to see what are the laws in the state, and we're going to follow those laws. Whereas if you had had a will that clearly outlined who gets what, it would have solved all the problems in both situations. And so both, pretty much everybody, if you don't have a will, you should go get a will, especially if you're married, have children. I mean, it just causes all sorts of problems if you don't have one in place.
Well, yeah, you need a will, and then you need 3 other documents for when you're alive, but you're not able to make decisions for yourself, like a power of attorney, a healthcare power of attorney, and a HIPAA release form. And those things are all done when you die, but then you need that will. And you need to have your beneficiaries straightened out. And you need to make sure your property's titled correctly. And these are just things people do. And what I'm going to add to this is that if you're sitting here watching, and a lot of these people that are in the 24% or the 47% or that don't have a will, they may be thinking, and they may be correct, they don't have a lot. And they're thinking that, let somebody else worry about that because I don't have much anyhow. I'm not going to do this whole to-do. Well, a couple of things I want to say. It's going to be a big hassle because somebody's going to have to do it. Even if it's not a lot, somebody's going to have to deal with your house and your car and your bank account. And so don't let that be an excuse. The other side of it is if you don't have a lot and you really want to leave something to your kids, there's this thing called life insurance. And you can buy life insurance while you're still in your 60s and 70s all day long. There's all types of things. And it doesn't have to be a lot, but you can buy whatever you can afford, and you can leave your kids or your spouse as the beneficiary. And it just kind of solves that problem. I don't have a lot, and that money passes by beneficiary. It comes real quick. So anybody that wants a quote on life insurance, there's our phone number. It's right there on the board. So I'm Hans Scheil.
And I'm Tom Griffith.
And we thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.